So if there's one thing that I have learned from lure making, it is that we are never satisfied. Let me explain. So I really enjoy fishing underspins. This one in particular is the herring head underspin. I'll show you the mold here in a minute. And this is just a little 3-inch Largo shad I threw on here because I had a couple days this past winter where this exact bait caught every single fish of the day and worked great. However, with fishing in general, we are all very opinionated. There are a few features about this underspin head that I just didn't really care for, and I wanted to try to build what I would consider my ultimate underspin. So I'm going to show you some of the features on this mold that I do and don't like, and then we'll go over what I have created. So as I mentioned, this is the herring head underspin. Now, what I do like about this underspin is it's simple. It's easy to make. You buy your mold, you take your favorite hook, you lay your hook in the mold, you buy your pre-made wire forms, throw your wire form in the mold, close it up, you're ready to pour. The ease of making these is the number one benefit of this underspin. Now, I'll show you some of the features that I personally don't really care for. First one, the wire form coming straight down. I feel like it tends to snag and get caught a little bit more than if, let's say, the wire was angled back a little bit. The second thing is this bait keeper right here. So this is just a lead bait keeper. There's nothing actually in there. I can take my thumb and smash that flat, which if you catch an aggressive fish and their bottom lip is pushing up against that, they will smash it flat every time. And then the next thing you know, your plastic starts to slide off. I just am not a fan of this bait keeper. Now you can just stick something in there, pry it back open, and you're good to keep going. And then the biggest thing that I didn't really care for about this one is if you're trying to fish fast on the retrieve, it tends to roll over on its side. I had trouble with it staying upright if I was fishing fast. Now, slow and methodical, this is phenomenal. Like I said, I have caught a ton of fish on this mold. But if you want to go fast, it does tend to roll over on its side, and I'm just not a big fan. So I'll show you what I have come up with. For those of you that follow me on Instagram, you've probably seen this, and then I've kind of thrown it in at the end of another video. But we have a poison tail head. We angled our wire form back so that it'll come across stuff a lot easier. Like you can see, I can run my finger from the hook eye down and it slides right off super smooth. And then I am a huge fan of screw lock bait keepers. I feel like a screw lock bait keeper makes your baits last better than anything else. The other thing, if you notice the shape of this head, see how it's fatter at the bottom and narrower at the top. What that does is it adds more weight towards the bottom of the head, keeping it upright. So if you do want to fish faster, the chances of it staying perfectly upright are a lot higher. Now you can just burn it and you can blow out any underspin that you're ever going to fish, but this one stays upright far better than the other one. And who doesn't love the poison tail head? Now, to make that underspin, I ran through every idea I could think of for a very long time. There are several different variations of the poison tail mold, and I finally found the one that I felt like was going to be the best, and it happened to work perfect the first time I tried it. That mold being the poison swingtail jig. So, if you know, this mold is meant to make a swingtail jig. Now, as you can see, we have modified it. This is a pretty heavily modified mold. So if you are not into modifying molds and doing a lot of cutting and grinding on your molds, the herring head is probably the one for you. Like I said, you just drop your hook in, pre-made wire form, you're good to go. However, if you're like me and you don't mind tinkering with stuff and just kind of making whatever you want, follow along and I'll show you how you can do it. So here's a better look at what we have done. Now I picked this mold because you can see here this little lead collar, which is meant for you can tie a skirt up here if you wanted to. I thought this is basically going to give us the best start to grind out a slot for our screw lock. Now from there, I had to figure out a way to block off the lead so that the lead didn't continue to flow and fill in our screw lock. Then from there, we grind a slot, as you can see right here, for our wire form. And then for this mold in particular, this is meant for a wire form to go up here, not an actual hook eye. Now, this little dot in the middle is larger than the hole on our hook eye. So step one, we have to get the hook to fit in the mold. So what I do to get this to fit, I don't want to grind on the outside. I don't need this slot to be any bigger. I just need that dot to be smaller. So I'm going to take this Dremel and I'm just going to go right around the edge of that dot on both sides. As you can see right here, I've already done it. Just enough to get that hook eye to fit. And with just a little bit of grinding, we were able to get the hook eye to sit all the way down in that mold. Now, one thing I want to make note of, this hook in particular, this is a must-add 32886 in a 3/0. I'm going to modify the half-ounce size today just because it's a little bit larger and it's going to be easier for you guys to see. Now, if I lay this hook right here in the mold where it's supposed to go, you can see the hook point actually sits over the edge of that. So for this cavity in particular, I'm going to have to grind a little notch for the hook tip, or the tip of the hook, to sit. Over here in the one I've already modified, the 3/8 ounce, you can see it clears and I did not have to do that. So your hook size and which cavity you're doing, you might have to grind a little slot for the tip of your hook. So that is step one. We ground down that little dot a little bit. We put our little notch right there for our hook. So as you can see, we can lay our hook in the mold, close it up, and we've got a good seal. Now, we did do that on both sides. We put a little notch for our hook, ground that out. Don't forget, you do have to do the same thing on both sides. But now that we're done, that is step number one. So after you get your hook to fit, the next thing you're going to do, don't put anything in the mold and pour lead. Now, the reason you do that, so you're going to pour the mold, you're going to take the lead that's in there, you're going to cut the back of it off right at the base of the head, and you're going to sand that down smooth. Now, just set this to the side. We'll come back to this later. So the next thing we need to do is modify where the existing lead collar is to accept our screw lock. Now, the way these screw locks work is you just basically thread them up onto your hook, and then you'll lay it in the mold like so. So we need to grind out that little lead collar area just enough to get our screw lock to fit. Because if I put it over here in the 3/8 ounce size, the one that I've already modified, you can see that it sits down in that little cavity nice and neat. So we're just going back to our Dremel. I just put a slightly larger bit on there. Now, a couple things I want to touch on. We're going to grind this out to where we can get that screw lock to fit. Now, as you can see on this one, I don't want to go down any farther than I did right there, because you still want to leave that notch for your hook to sit. That way it keeps everything in line. So I'm basically going to go from the outside edge of this existing collar, go down, across, and then I'll go up just a little bit if I need a little extra room for that screw lock to fit. So I'm just going to grind out basically a little rectangle right here, and then we're going to see if it fits. So we have our channels ground out on both sides for our screw lock. And as you can see, we can close our mold and we are good to go. Now, the next step is we have to figure out what we're going to do for our wire forms. Now, for our wire forms, my initial thought was to take the wire form from the other underspin mold and be able to use it how I wanted. Now, if I put it over here on the 3/8 ounce size, as you can see, it's not long enough. So you need that little hook at the end to be up in the bottom of the head so that it'll hold it in place. Now, since this one isn't going to be long enough, and the reason it's not going to be long enough, if I were to go straight down like the herring head, it would be fine. But I want it to be angled back. So if I were to angle this back and leave it up high enough to where it would be in the head, the gap from your blade to your bait is only going to be about, I don't know, a 1/16 of an inch, which means your blade is just going to stick to the bottom of your swim bait and not actually spin. So I knew that I was going to have to make my own wire forms. So I'll show you how we do that. So we busted out our commercial wire former from Barlows, and I grabbed the straight wire shafts. Now this one in particular is the 40 thousandths wire diameter. You can go heavier or lighter, whichever you would like. Now what I did was I just put the end of the wire even with that knob on the left. Just bend our loop and leave it like that. So we're going to take this back over to the mold and figure out what length we need to get it. There are a couple things to make note of prior to positioning your wire form. First one being the hook. You want to put your hook in the mold. Now you're going to be moving around a lot, so I've found it's best to just position your hook in the mold and throw a piece of tape over it. That way you can move it around and you don't have to worry about everything falling out on you. Now you're going to want to position this, as you can see on the 3/8 ounce size. I positioned it at the angle that I wanted. I made sure that I had a big enough gap between where the bottom of the swim bait is going to go and where my blade is going to be, so that I had enough clearance for that blade to swivel. So you're basically going to do the same thing. You're going to position it in place on whatever cavity you're modifying. So for this one, that angle right there looks pretty good. It matches the 3/8 ounce size. It doesn't, so if you grind into this bottom cavity down here, it doesn't matter. There is no lead going into anything down here. As long as you're not in the head of the bait, you'll be fine. So what I did was I basically eyeballed it, got it to where I needed it to be. I took a small pair of pliers and basically grabbed that wire right at the base of where it's going to go into the head. And then from there, you just twist that wire around and then clip it off. So once you get it clipped off, you're going to lay it back in place, and you're going to make sure that if that's where I have it, it doesn't interfere with the hook, and there's enough of that wire form into the base of the head that once I pour the lead, I'm going to get a really good bond, and that is going to stay where it's at. Now, one thing with this wire form, do not use your original wire form. Save this one so that every wire form you make afterwards, you can make it based off of this one, because you're going to modify your mold to the original. So don't use the original. And now that we have our wire form positioned where we want it, I've thrown another piece of tape over the wire form to hold it in place. Now we're going to close up our mold, and I'll show you how to leave an imprint of that wire form. Alright, so what I do is I lay this on a block of wood. Leave your handles off of the edge of the wood so that you don't break them. Just hold it tight, grab another block of wood, smack it real hard, and that will leave your imprint. Now, after we hit that mold, you can see you have a very clear imprint on both sides of your mold where your wire form needs to be. So, as you guessed it, we're going to get our Dremel back out. We're going to grind that slot on both sides just deep enough for our wire form to fit. Now, one thing I am going to do different, right at the end of the wire form where it goes into the head, I don't use a Dremel on that portion. I'll take the tip of a file and file the end of that, because I don't want the Dremel to catch the edge of that head and jump one way or the other. and mess up the mold. So I'll Dremel all of this up to the edge of that, and then I'll just finish it off with a file. So as you can see, we now have our channel on both sides ground in for our wire form. Now the last thing we need to do is test fit everything. So we're going to take our hook, our screw lock, our wire form, everything that we're going to have in the mold. We'll lay it all in place, close it up, and make sure that we have a good seal, which we do. So now that we have everything ground into our mold so that all of our components fit, we need to block off the flow of lead from the back of the jig head to our screw lock. So as you can see here, we've just used some red high temp. Here, let me show you. It's this high temp gasket maker. I just got this at my local store. I'm sure you can find it just about any hardware store, Walmart, wherever you want to get it. Now, how do we get a nice, clean, smooth finish up against the back of that jig head? Well, do you remember this little guy? So what we're going to do, we're going to take this. We've already cleaned it up, made it nice and smooth and flat on the back side of the jig head. This is where I want the lead to stop. So what we're going to do, we're going to take just a tiny, tiny bit of Vaseline. I mean, just very, very minor amount, and rub it on the back of that jig head. So basically anywhere that red RTV is going to make contact with the jig head, you just want to put a very light coat of Vaseline on there. Now you're going to put that jig head back into the cavity. You're going to take a little bit of your RTV, and I mean a tiny amount. It doesn't take much at all, just that little bitty glob right there. And then what I did was I just took this little flat scraper. I don't even know what it is, but you just want to take something flat. It could be a flathead screwdriver, whatever you want. You're going to take just a tiny bit of that red RTV, and you're going to go right to the base of that jig head and just smear it in there. Make it nice and flat and even with the top of the mold. So as you can see, we've got our red RTV and we've made it flat and flush with the top of this mold. Now the absolute hardest part of this entire thing now is we wait. So this red RTV, they say takes 24 hours to fully cure. There is a tack-free time. However, I just let it fully cure. So I'm going to come back in 24 hours. I'm going to take this out. I'm going to swap it over to the other side, do the exact same thing, wait another 24 hours, and then we're ready to pour some jigs. That Vaseline that we put on the back of the jig head is going to act as a release agent. The red RTV will not stick to the back of the jig head. We'll pop it out, move it over, do the same thing, rinse and repeat. So I will see you guys in 2 days. So it's 2 days later. We have both sides of our mold complete. I'll show you how you're getting this head out of the mold. We've got our lead pot plugged in and we're almost ready to pour some of these. So as you can see right here on the bottom of the head, you're going to have a little bit of that extra silicone from spreading that on. All I do is take a little X-Acto knife and basically just cut right at where that head comes together. The silicone cuts extremely easy, so you just make a nice little cut right along that. You're going to grab that head, and like I said, that Vaseline will act as a release agent to keep the silicone from sticking to the head. It pops right out. Once you get that out, you're left with that nice, clean, smooth edge that'll block off all of your lead flow. And while we're waiting on our lead to melt, we're going to make up some of these wire forms. Now, the benefit of this commercial wire former is if I repeat the process of how I made that, everything will be exactly the same. So what I do is I make my bend. I take that original wire form. As I mentioned, don't use that wire form. Save it. So what I'm going to do is I line it up with the new wire. I line the new wire form up with the old one. So make sure the bottoms are even, and then you just bend that wire around your pliers, and you can duplicate the exact wire forms over and over. I will duplicate as many of these as I need. These again is the 40 thousandths wire form, or the wire shaft. These are 8-inch shafts. You're able to get 6 wire forms per shaft. These come in bags of 100, so you can get 600 of these wire forms in one bag of wire. All that's left to do is just lay our components in the mold. Now you'll notice on the silicone, I didn't cut a slot for the hook or the screw lock. That's because that silicone will flex. That way when you close the mold, the silicone will compress around it. You'll get a nice seal around those two pieces, and none of the lead will come through. And after all that cutting and grinding on your mold, this is what you're left with. You can see at the back of that head, the lead fills in but doesn't flash out behind your hook and your screw lock. I went with this mold also because it's not a weedless mold, so you don't have to worry about sanding where that weed guard would go flat. Everything is nice and clean. You just cut your screws off, clean up that little edge, and you're ready for powder coat. Just throw your favorite powder coat on there, throw some eyeballs on it, attach your blade and your swivel. I went with a size 1 ball bearing swivel with a size 3 willow leaf blade. These are going to be thrown with a 3.8-inch swim bait, and I think these are the perfect size. This one is just a nice natural shad pattern with a silver blade, and then of course I made some Tennessee shads with a gold blade, and that powder coat just looks incredible. That is a custom blend for the top color with some of the 8-Bit Baits hollow shift in there. If you guys want to know how that's made, just let me know, and let me know what you guys think. And here's what it looks like fully rigged out. Again, this is on a 3.8-inch swim bait, and as you can see with that wire form being angled back, it is going to remain very weedless. It comes over the top of stuff very well, and we still have plenty of clearance for our blade down below the swim bait so that it doesn't affect the action of the blade. I've made these again in 3/8 and now 1/2 ounce. I've tested the 3/8 ounce ones a lot, and they work incredibly well. So this is step by step how you can go from a swing tail mold to this little underspin right here. Let me know what you guys think. One last thing that I want to touch on. So as I mentioned, this is the 1/2 ounce size. Now somebody is going to be like, yeah, but you eliminated all of that lead down below the head, which is correct. However, it just so happens that the wire form, swivel, and blade equal the amount of lead that we eliminated. So if I lay this 1/2 ounce jig head on there, we are setting at a 1/2 ounce. That just happened to work out. I'm sure there's going to be a slight difference between the smallest and the largest, but for the most part, the wire, swivel, and blade will equal that amount of lead that we eliminated. So the weights of these cavities will still remain very true. And there you have it, guys. That is step by step how you can make these poison tail underspins yourself. It took me a very long time to figure out the actual mold combination and all the hardware and everything that I needed to get it done. So hopefully you guys find this video beneficial if you want to make these as well. Now, it does seem like a lot of work, and it is up front, but you only have to do it one time. If you take your time and you modify the mold in the exact same manner that we did, it's very smooth sailing from that point on. For all of you that pour lead, you know, you plug your lead pot in, you're going to be waiting 20 to 25 minutes before you're ready to pour. So what I do is when I plug my lead pot in, I'll start making those wire forms. And you can make them pretty quick once you get a system down. So in the amount of time that it takes for my lead pot to get up to temperature one time, I can make enough wire forms for as long as I want. I'm not going to go through that many of these underspins. But at the time of recording this video, everything that is needed to make these molds are in stock. However, some of these components can come in and out of stock somewhat frequently. So if you are interested and want to make these for yourself, don't wait around too long. I will leave everything that I use linked down in the description below. All of the Barlows links will be my affiliate links if you guys want to help out the channel, or you can use our code at checkout. If not, no harm, no foul. We're going to continue to make these types of videos for you guys. So hopefully you guys found this video useful and liked it. And if you did, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you on the next one.